All right. Good evening, everyone. We're just going to wait for a couple of minutes for the attendees to come in. My name is Arya Majumdar. I am the Dean of Admissions and Outreach at the OP Jindal Global University. While we are waiting for attendees to come in, I thought we could introduce the university and the Jindal School of International Affairs. So the OP Jindal Global University is located in India and is a global not-for-profit university based out of India. It's been established by the government of Haryana and is one of the top universities in India itself. It maintains a 1:8 faculty ratio and appoints faculty members from India and across the world. JGU, the university itself, is made up of 10 schools, of which one of them is the Jindal School of International Affairs. Now, the Jindal School of International Affairs is India's first global policy school and was established as at the third school of the OP Jindal Global University. This is one of the few higher education institutions that that explicitly combines the scholarly weights of three interrelated disciplines, namely international relations, international law, and international business. So the Jindal School of International Affairs is offering an MA in International Relations, Security, and Strategy. And to talk about this degree program, I have with me Professor Dr. Mohan Kumar. Now, Professor Dr. Mohan Kumar has a long and illustrious career in the Indian Foreign Service lasting 36 years, which culminated, and he recently retired as India's ambassador to France based in Paris. Under his watch, the Indo-French strategic partnership was strengthened and consolidated further in spheres such as defense, space, nuclear, solar energy, smart cities, and investment. He also has a strategic understanding of India's ties with some of her key neighbors such as Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, Myanmar, and Maldives. As of date, he's a faculty member at the Jindal School of International Affairs, and he oversees the entire curriculum and the entire program of the Master of Arts in International Relations, Security, and Strategy. Without further ado, what we're going to do is go straight into this open house. What I will request our participants to do is, if you have any questions at any point of time, feel free to jot them down in the Q&A. So Professor Kumar and we're going to have a bit of a back and forth for the first half of this 1 hour long webinar. And perhaps towards the latter half, we'll take some of the questions from the audience. If you should have any questions, feel free to put those questions into the chat box or the Q&A box. All right, so without further ado, Professor Kumar, within the greater context of what's been happening in the world, what's been happening with diplomatic ties across countries within the global pandemic, what was the thought process behind this particular program, the MA in International Relations, Security, and Strategy? Professor Kumar.
Thank you very much, Professor Majumdar, and it's a great pleasure to be here, and I look forward to taking questions from the young audience. I think the pandemic upended several of the trends that we were already seeing. So in that sense, I have thought long and hard about the pandemic, and I have come to the conclusion that there is nothing radically new that it has introduced, but what would have normally happened over 10 years has suddenly happened over 18 months. So what has happened in the Jindal Global University is that the pandemic hit us in March 2020, and by April 2020, we spent massive resources to have online teaching. You know that, Professor Majumdar, as well. You were involved with it. I was involved with it. All of us were involved with it. And therefore, we took, I think, the right decision. What I want to convey to the audience through you is that every crisis represents an opportunity. And I think an American politician once said, never allow a crisis to go waste, because it represents an opportunity. And I would say that the thought process behind launching the first ever course on MA International Relations, Security and Strategy in India is essentially to take advantage of the pandemic, if you like, and offer an online course to people who may be interested. I did an MBA by default because I belong to a completely different generation where my parents said, if you don't make it to the foreign service, you must have a plan B and so on. But I just want to convey to the audience that if such a course were available, I would have taken it willingly. Because those of us who are passionate about international relations, security, and strategy should not be wanting to make tough choices like give up your job, join a university, and so on. So I believe this course is absolutely tailor-made. It meets the challenge posed by the pandemic head on by saying, okay, we are not going to wait forever for this pandemic to end. We will take advantage of this opportunity, of this crisis, to have this course, which is completely online. And I think it is done in association with the best platform, the online platform in the world, which is Coursera. So really, I would say the thought process is one of staying ahead of the curve, because I don't think the pandemic or the situation is going to leave us anytime soon. This is not the last pandemic.
Yeah.
Every scientist will tell you that we're going to have this situation again and again. So I think it's a question of taking advantage of this crisis and to stay ahead of the curve. And that is what I think the Jindal Global University has done.
Right. So a couple of key takeaways, and so that I've understood correctly, that we were going to go online anyways, perhaps in the next 2 years, 5 years, 10 years down the line. And what this pandemic has allowed us to do is sort of shorten that timeline a little bit. And it was going to be inevitable that some university or the other would have come up with a postgraduate program in international relations, right? And I'm so very glad that you mentioned, Professor Kumar, that Jindal is the first university to offer an MA in international relations, security, and strategy. Wonderful. So we have quite a large number of an audience here. So could you tell us a little bit more about what kind of learners we should be seriously considering in this program? I mean, what are the kind of students that we are looking for? I know you mentioned, as a program, this allows you to stay at home or work while adding on the skills from this program. So what kind of students or learners are we actually looking for?
Thank you very much. And that's a very interesting question because it is an exclusively online course. I would not straitjacket this like the way you do normally when you are trying to advertise an MA course in international relations. You are looking frankly between you and me at somewhere between 20 to 30 years old, those who have finished their undergraduate degree, those who have the time to spare, and so on. All these assumptions have to be thrown out of the window because this is an MA online course on international relations. Obviously, you need to have an undergraduate degree, but beyond that, frankly, I am more interested in having people in my course who can demonstrate three things. One, a passion for international relations. Two, a desire from practitioners. And I will come back to that in a subsequent a moment of time in this program, because this is not your usual program, which is taught by theoreticians. And that is the mojo of this course. So I'll come back to that. And the third and the most important is, I genuinely believe now that international relations is not just for academics or diplomats. I was myself a diplomat, as you kindly mentioned in your introduction. But what I now find is that if you are working for Coca-Cola, if you're working for Amazon, if you're working for Pepsi, I find it hard to believe that you can be a manager even in India without knowing the broad framework of international relations. How do you operate? Because your company is international. Most companies are international. And even assuming that you are in a small, medium enterprise, even then you are looking at markets abroad. So I would say that knowledge of international relations is no longer a luxury that it used to be in my generation. Right now, it's become a necessity. So I wouldn't straitjacket somebody by saying only those who want to do masters in international relations or academics, those who want to get into the foreign service. I would extend this much further to learners, to people who are interested in a corporate career, working for a company, working for a non-governmental organization. Somebody wants to work for Amnesty International. Somebody wants to work for Oxford, Oxfam. How do you do that without knowing international relations? You want to work for the UN. So I would say that knowledge of international relations has now become very, very mainstream. It's no longer this esoteric subject that one used to learn only for joining the foreign service or for becoming an academic. So that's the kind of audience that I'm expecting. I don't have, it is completely age neutral. I don't have a problem with somebody who's 50 years sitting in front of me, and I don't have a problem with somebody 25 years sitting in front of me. That's the great thing about the online course. It's completely age neutral. So I think those are the kind of things we are looking for in this absolutely novel first ever online course.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Professor Kumar. I think that point you made about completely age neutral, and I'm looking at some of the applications that have been submitted already. We're getting students, or we're getting applications from not just all age groups, but across the world. And if you see the list of participants here, of course, they are from pretty much all over the world. So I think what Professor Kumar mentioned was very, very true. Graduates of the Jindal School of International Affairs, students who do the on-campus, in-person, the MADLB, the Diplomacy, Law and Business program, they've gone on to work not only at various embassies or with the Ministry of External Affairs, but they have been, or they are working at a number of multinational companies, which means that this idea that the knowledge of international relations permeates even into international business, this idea is one whose time has come. All right, now over to a few more sort of technical details, Professor Kumar. The curriculum. Now we do have an MA Diplomacy, Law and Business on campus. It's been running for quite a few years. We are now in the 10th year of the MA DLB program. So the MA in International Relations, which is completely online on Coursera, let's talk a little bit about the curriculum. What are the foundational courses like? What kind of ideas or thoughts or skills will our learners be exposed to?
Thank you very much. I was part of the task force which went into the designing of this curriculum, and we had to pay a lot of attention to two things. One, we did not want this to be India specific and just confined to India. The whole purpose of having an online platform and an online course with Coursera is that you don't recognize geographical borders. Pretty much somebody who's living in Outer Mongolia, Mali, Sierra Leone, Canada, United States, we don't treat them any differently. So that was the first criterion. The second criterion was I was very particular that this course should be oriented towards what practice happens in each of these areas. So I'm very happy to tell you that apart from me, of course, and I teach diplomatic practice using my 36 years experience in the Indian Foreign Service, but two of my other colleagues, one of them will be doing maritime security and strategy, and this will be done by somebody who has spent 20 years in the Indian Navy, for example. And the third one, which is on intelligence, terrorism, and counterterrorism, will be done by somebody who's associated with the National Security Advisory Board of the Government of India. So I was very particular when I headed this task force that we don't want, I mean, you will have a lot of theory, obviously, but we don't want this course to be devoid of the practitioner's perspective. And I lead that to some extent at the risk of being immodest. We have a group of practitioners, and we are going to bring a practitioner's perspective to this course. This goes back to what you were saying, Professor Majumdar, earlier, if you are a middle-aged person and you're already working for a company, I'm assuming you will be less interested in knowing the difference between the realist school of international relations and the neo-realist school of international relations, rather than understanding what is the game in Indo-Pacific. What is the real counter-terrorism strategy that the Indian government is using? And what do diplomatic missions do? If you're a small, medium entrepreneur, you need to know that there is a commercial wing in every embassy. And it is the duty of the commercial wing of the embassy to respond to queries from small and medium entrepreneurs. If you belong to Coca-Cola, it may not be a problem. But if you belong to a small, medium enterprise, you need to know, what do diplomatic missions do? How can they help you? What do state governments do? For example, in my course, I talk of para-diplomacy, which is really diplomacy by subnational entities like states. We talk of diaspora diplomacy. If you go abroad and you are settled there as diaspora, as India's diaspora, you are interested in what your government is doing. So I would say the course curriculum is based on three things. One, practitioner's perspective. Second, what can be of use for corporate entities, for people who live abroad? And finally, to enable everybody to understand where the international landscape is moving. Where are we moving? You know, the unipolar moment of US domination is gone. There is a US-China friction which is writ all over the world. How can a company, how can an institution navigate this uncertain international order? That for me was imperative when we were designing this course.
Right. So Professor Kumar, I took away a few key things from your response. The first is, even though we as a university are based in India, this is not India-centric at all, right? We're looking at the vast sort of the vastness of international relations across the world. But interestingly, this is perhaps one of the few international relations programs that is viewing the subject from the global south, from a developing country's perspective. Would it be correct to say that?
We have a fair bit of that, but we did not want, for example, in my course, I make it a point not to just keep talking about the Indian foreign policy perspective,
Right.
Because I'm assuming this audience will be predominantly non-Indian. I don't know how it looks like, but you are the best judge for that. But I assumed that it will be at least 50% non-Indian, if not more. If that is the case, telling somebody who's based in Mali or Sierra Leone or Canada and just talking about the Indian perspective may not make much sense. So we have made it a point, along with my professors, to make sure that we are looking at this course. Obviously, the global south will come in, you're right, because at the end of the day, I am who I am. And my teaching will be based on my experience and practice, which is global south, of course. But we are making it a point not to make it India specific, so that people who don't belong to India and who presumably will dominate the applications of this course will be able to appreciate the global perspective. That's what, and we are getting as many foreign professors as possible. From the very first course, my colleague from Italy, she will be teaching the theory of international relations.
Wow.
And I'm assuming that she will bring her perspective. So even the professors are not all Indian. So we are trying to see how to make this an absolutely, what shall I say, an avant-garde course in India, where it will not be an Indian course, but it will be an international course on security, strategy, and of course, international.
Right. So it's interesting that you mentioned, where our learners are coming from. I'm just looking at the chat box here, and we have, learners and in the audience, people from Indonesia, from Uganda, from China, really across the world. Right. Another key takeaway that I thought, we should sort of stress upon, something that you did already, is the practical application of international relations. I mean, I noticed that you mentioned if you're a company like Coca-Cola, you may not be bothered with international relations so much, but we know what's happening with Twitter in India and a few other countries as well. So for that, Twitter obviously needs to up its diplomatic game at some point of time, right? But it's really, really imperative that if our learners are working and they expect that this program is to provide a set of new skills that they can then translate into some changes in their workplace, some changes in their careers, then it has to be practical oriented. It cannot be just theory. I think that's something that should be stressed upon. Thank you very much. So you mentioned that it will have a fairly global outlook, and we have faculty members from across the world, and they will be sort of bringing in their own perspectives into the classroom. And I just want to mention here, with 36 years of diplomatic practice, bringing that into the classroom, that is something that I think most learners should be looking forward to. Right now, we've got a fair number of people in the audience who are trying to think about or are trying to figure out what advantage will I get from this course, right? So what should our learners expect from this program as graduate outcomes? Because it becomes very important for us to manage expectations. So if you could talk a little bit about the knowledge or the skills that we expect our learners to sort of develop by the time they graduate from this, that would be really helpful.
Thank you. No, I think I'll begin by saying that this is a period that is going to figure in everybody's CV, this pandemic period. And you're going to have 2 or 3 kind of CVs in 5 years' time. You're going to have one person say that, listen, I'm sorry, it was the pandemic. I didn't do much. So you will see a gap in my CV.
Right.
One possibility. The second possibility is that you can say, I'm sorry, I worked from home, but that's all I did. I think you need a third kind of CV, in my view, during the pandemic. And that should be, what extra did you do during the pandemic? And if you can demonstrate to people in the future that during the pandemic, you were able to do a course like the MAIRSS with Coursera and with OP Jindal Global University, and I have ended up acquiring skills. Now, that would be the best possible CV in my view. If I was a headhunter, I would perfectly understand if somebody said to me, I did nothing, sorry, it was the pandemic. But to those who say, sorry, I did something extra here during the time that was afforded to me, I think that should be the right perspective. In terms of specific skills that this understanding of not just the theory of international relations, but diplomatic practice. What do diplomatic missions do? What do diplomats do? What do ambassadors do? So that's the first. The second, in terms of maritime security and strategy, because security is becoming so important, and you may well ask me, and I'm anticipating this question, if I work for a company, why do I care whether US and China are fighting in the Indo-Pacific or not? I will give you the answer. There is a concept called weaponization of trade.
Okay.
And there are supply chains which are being reworked.
Right.
We are talking about resilient supply chains. Supply chains are seeking to diversify from over-dependence on China. So I see a lot of commercial implications in the Indo-Pacific strategy, that the quadrilateral alliance, for example, between the United States, Australia, India, Japan. So it would be wrong to assume that these are just abstract concepts, Indo-Pacific, maritime strategy, security. No, you are take the 5G saga, the fifth generation. It is very clear to me that you're going to have a fragmentation of the international system into one set of 5G technology and the other kind of 5G technology. The internet is no longer going to be the internet. In my view, it is going to be the splinternet.
Okay.
You are going to have one set. I mean, obviously in India, you are not going to have WeChat and Weibo. It is obvious to me that in China, you are not going to have Google, Amazon, Facebook. So what exactly are we talking about? We are talking about serious commercial implications flowing out from diplomatic practice. So I think it would be wrong for anybody who even works in a company or an institution to think that what is happening in international relations does not affect me. I think every single important decision on investment, trade, and supply chains is going to be strategic. It's going to be political. So without understanding geopolitics and strategy, you cannot really rise. I'm even assuming that if you are the regional manager for Coca-Cola, going back to my Coca-Cola example, I think you need to understand what's going on in terms of supply chains, in terms of where trade is happening, where trade is not happening. What are the kind of free trade agreements that are being signed between countries? Why are they doing it? So I see that this course will enable you to not just understand the international order as it exists. I'm hoping that this course will enable you to think critically about international relations in terms of what you are doing.
Right.
And this critical thinking of international relations, regardless of what you do in your life, is, I think, something that we think this course will impart because of the courses that are being taught. So I think it's a great value. And of course, I'm not even talking about the obvious advantages for academics, obvious advantages for journalists, obvious advantages for those who want to do a PhD in international relations, those who want to join the diplomatic service, those who want to join non-governmental organizations like Amnesty International, Oxfam. All that is obvious. But I am picking the least likely example, which is you're working for Coca-Cola. Why should I do this course? Why should I waste my money on this course? I'm trying to answer that question for you. If you want to really look at an international perspective for your company in terms of the products and services that you're selling, I think you should do this course. That would be my tagline for this course.
So I completely agree with you, Professor Kumar. I mean, I think it's an underlying philosophy at our university that, the world problems, whatever problems the world is facing, whether it's healthcare, poverty, development, security, climate crisis, etc. These are not problems that can be solved through one discipline alone, right? Which is why we constantly advocate a multidisciplinary approach or a multi-perspective approach to any problem, right? My favorite quote or my favorite example has to do with climate change. We know the science behind climate change, but we're not doing enough because that problem is no longer based in science. It's based in politics. It's based in economics. It's based in poverty, right? So I do have a feeling that anybody who is working in any industry with a global outlook, and that industry depends upon supply chains or consumers outside of their country, that is a person that could benefit from this MAIRSS. All right. Now, Professor Kumar, anything that you feel that we missed out and we could possibly explain again or in more detail?
Sorry, I missed you because you're...
Sorry, yes, my internet connection might be a little...
Yes.
Is there anything else that you'd like to share with our audience today before we move on to the audience questions? Something that we should have added or maybe deliberated a little bit more upon?
No, not really, except that you are going to get a practitioner's perspective by those of us who have done this and been in this profession through concrete case. I saw a question in the chat box that what is going to be the pedagogical approach of this course. And you must understand that the reason why OP Jindal Global University has tied up with Coursera is because Coursera is the best online platform in the world. And I must be honest with you, we had to completely redesign the course because Coursera has its own prescriptions.
Sure.
They have the concept of a practice quiz. They have the concept, for example, I mean, I might as well share this with you. I, thought that we will all do half an hour videos. So we recorded ourselves and sent it to Coursera. Coursera sent it back to us and said, no way, please do 8 to 10 minutes videos.
Right.
So can you believe it? Somebody like me had to do 100 videos of 8 minutes each.
Yeah.
That was my course on diplomatic practice. The 8-minute video is supposed to enable better learning, and each video will dwell on a substantive concept. I must confess, as somebody who's 64 years old and who has done 36 years in the diplomatic service, I learned a lot as well doing this course, frankly, because it seems to me that the pedagogical approach is that you learn concepts through short videos, you will have practice quizzes, you will have frequent tests to kind of know whether you learned or not. Finally, you will be asked to do a project. So it's a project-based approach. To give you an example, my project for you might be maybe pick a middle power in the world, and the example of a classic middle power is India. We are not a great power yet, but we are a middle power. We are a leading power, middle power, emerging power. And then look at this power and look at the economic diplomacy of this middle power and see what are the shortfalls in it. How can India do better? So those are the kind of projects that we would like you to learn. So it's not just cramming. That's what I want to tell you. That is the pedagogical approach of this course. And I would say that when you are looking at things like maritime security, and for example, we believe the international legal framework is very important. In my course, you're going to learn about at least 2 international treaties. One is the Montevideo Convention on the rights and duties of a state. Second, you will know about the Vienna Convention on Diplomatic Relations, 1961. But in the course on maritime strategy, you will also know about the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, for example, so that you know what is happening in South China Sea, East China Sea, what is likely to happen, and so on. So I think it's a fascinating mix of theory, practice, law. You're going to have all 3. And to me, it seems that regardless of your profession, this will open your mind to international possibilities. And even in terms of growth, it may not be relevant for you just yet, but I believe very frankly that regardless of what you do, the world has become so interconnected that it's no longer possible for you to say, I'm going to confine myself to India and that's it. I'm not bothered about what's happening in Indo-Pacific. I'm not bothered about what's happening outside. I don't think you can say that. So that's really the mojo and the USP of this course. Thank you.
So, so Professor Kumar, we've had a number of questions and we'll deal with some of them. I think some of them we can deal with very, very quickly. And those will be more or less housekeeping kind of questions. But I'd like to ask you a little bit about the recognition that the Jindal School of International Affairs has. So this is the only degree program in international relations on Coursera, right? I believe that it is the only international relations degree program on a recognized platform like Coursera, or if you look at edX or Udacity, and it is by India's top global policy school and international relations school. Now, could you talk a little bit about how well the Jindal School of International Affairs, that name, what weight does it carry internationally? So for example, if I were to, let's say, walk into Coca-Cola headquarters, wherever that is, right, or into another university, would they recognize the Jindal School of International Affairs?
I think, Professor Majumdar, if you had asked me this question 5 years ago,
Mhm.
answer would have been substantially different.
Okay.
And I would have said maybe, maybe not. It is there for everyone to see the results in the last couple of years. I mean, to get into the QS rankings just after 11 years of existence as a university is nothing short of spectacular, frankly. Because some of the universities you are competing with are 100 years old.
More.
University which is just 11 years old. 11 years is absolutely nothing in a university's life. So the kind of progress that we have made is nothing short of dramatic. Secondly, I would also say that because of the student professor ratio and because of the range of faculty that we have in the School of International Affairs in the Jindal Global University, I would not be wrong if I said the School of International Affairs, the Jindal School of International Affairs, is definitely in the top 2 or 3 international relations schools in the country and indeed in the region, in Asia. Because it's not easy to kind of get a school where 30% of your faculty is completely foreign, where 50 to 60%, for example, the audience should not think that I was hired only because I spent 36 years in the Indian Foreign Service. I mean, that was certainly one reason. I also have a doctorate from Sciences Po in Paris.
Right.
It's not as if I've just walked in, claiming that I am a diplomat and so on. I did my doctorate is from Sciences Po, and those who know France and their Grande École system will know that Sciences Po is actually in the top 5 schools after Harvard in terms of political science and international relations. It's a very highly ranked school. So most of us, I think, know what we are doing. And I would say that today, if you walk into any place where they know the university system in India, I don't think you will be Jindal reputation that has been built over the last 4 or 5 years, I'd say.
Right. Wonderful. Thank you so much. And I completely agree. Most of our faculty members, I'd say about 90% of our faculty members, they take up, they come from the top universities from across the world. We do maintain that 1:8 faculty student ratio, which is why we are in the top 700 of the world as a university, right? I just wanted to address a few questions on the admission process. The admission process is now live. So if you need to figure out what the admission process is and all the other nitty-gritties, now is probably a good time to explain that. There is an application process that you can start from Coursera. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to put down the link to the course in the chat box. You should be able to see it right there. So if you head on over to the link, perhaps after this webinar is over, you could get your application started. So for those of you who have questions about how long the course is going to be, what is the curriculum, what are the subjects that will be covered, what is the fee structure like, that is something that you should be able to get on the landing page, on the link that I've shared with you on the chat, right? So I have a couple of questions. Yes.
Sorry, Professor Majumdar, there are some questions on financial aid and scholarship. Yes. Can they send a mail to you, or maybe you'd like to address?
No, I'm happy to explain that right away. On financial aid and scholarships as a policy, the Jindal Global University does not offer any financial aid or scholarships on online programs. We do have, however, a robust financial aid policy for students in our on-campus program. Having said that, Coursera has tied up with a number of financial agencies and financial institutions, which might help you consider taking up a program with Coursera, even if it is not with us at Jindal. Now, having said that, I will mention that this program is possibly one of the more in terms of pricing, it's probably on the lower end of the spectrum as compared to other sort of degree programs, perhaps in business and data sciences. All right, wonderful. So let's get started with a few of these questions. Um, all right. So we've got a very interesting question. Will the University Grants Commission recognize this course online? And effectively, has this course been taught before? Now, we do have a master's in diplomacy, law, and business. So is this a brand new course, Professor Kumar? Or do we take some influence or some inspiration from our ongoing master's in diplomacy?
The honest answer to that question would have to be, it is absolutely brand new.
Okay.
And we have tailored this for the international audience because if you include law, you get into what kind of legal system you have to teach, Commonwealth, non-Commonwealth. We didn't want to get into that. So this is a pure and simple master's in international relations, security and strategy. And security in particular, I would emphasize, because there is almost 40% of the course which is completely security, which essentially is maritime security, but also terrorism, small arms, etc. So defense is a good part of this course, and that is important, frankly, regardless of what occupation you belong to. So I would say that this is a brand new course in that sense. It has some commonality with the MADLB, as you say, but very little, I would say.
Right. Okay. So effectively a brand new course, some commonality, but this is something that would be far more relevant to a global audience. Right. We've got a few questions on the curriculum. Professor Kumar, do you want to talk about a few of the courses that are there in the curriculum? It's there on the course page, but perhaps it might be useful to talk about some that, these are the kind of courses that you'll be taught. This is how you'll be assessed and so on and so forth.
Sure, absolutely. For example, there are 8 core courses. I will begin with my course, which is diplomatic practice. I think I had a chance to tell you that we will talk about diplomatic missions, about diplomats, what is a professional diplomatic service. We will talk of political diplomacy, economic diplomacy, cultural diplomacy, for example. I spend quite a bit of time towards the end of my course on how the future of diplomatic practice is being shaped by the social media. When I joined the Foreign Service in 1981, there was no mobile phone, there was no computer, there was no laptop, and there was no fax. Not that old, but I'm old. So this has completely changed now. So I'm talking about the impact of social media on diplomacy.
Right.
The pandemic has completely upended this, as I said. So I think that is one course. The other course that you're going to have is maritime security and naval strategy. Right. This is absolutely fascinating. If you look at what is going on in the South China Sea, and if you look at the friction between United States, China, some of the ASEAN states, the code of conduct that is being negotiated between ASEAN and China. So it's a fascinating kind of theater, if you like. Terrorism, counterterrorism, I mentioned. The other important course that I should mention is the foreign policies of great, middle, and small powers. And that is interesting. Not just the United States, China, and other countries, but also middle powers like India, Japan, for example, South Korea, Brazil, Germany. So those, and small powers. You can't ignore the small powers. For example, I remember participating in the climate change negotiations in Paris when I was ambassador there. And the small countries had a lot of clout in the climate change negotiations. Because while India, China, and the US were debating emissions, the small countries came and told us, while you debate about emissions, we may not exist at all in 20 years' time. We may just be, we just go under the ocean.
Especially for a nation like, for example, let's say Vanuatu. They might be underwater in 10 years. That's true.
Exactly, Vanuatu. In fact, you're right, Professor Majumdar, it was Vanuatu. And they lead a small island economies negotiating forum. And they said, listen, you guys are talking till the cows come home. We won't even be there while you talk about. So Small countries' foreign policies should not be ignored, and that's important. Law and ethics in international relations is an interesting aspect, I thought. There is also negotiation. We're also teaching you negotiating skills. This, again, is cross-sectoral. It doesn't matter whether you belong to a small company or a big company, small organization, big organization, national organization, international organization. Everybody needs negotiation skills. And I'll be honest, I wish I was able to go to a course like this when I started my journey in diplomacy, because frankly, there is no need for you to learn by making mistakes these days. It can all be taught to you.
Right.
At least you can avoid making those mistakes. To ask somebody to learn everything de novo by making mistakes is very foolish. When somebody else has done it, you might as well take advantage of it. So I would say that. We also have a list of electives. Those are the core courses that I just mentioned. And you've got a number of electives to choose from. I will give you some examples. One is multilateral institutions and global security. So if you're interested in what's going on in the United Nations, the WHO, and so on, we've got South-South cooperation and foreign policy of developing countries. That's an elective. I still think there could be a fair degree of interest among students who may want to know, what is the global South doing? What is their strategy? And if you were to have that, that will not be part of the core course because this is an international MA, but we will offer it as an elective to you. You can take it as an elective. The geopolitics of Southeast Asia is something that cyber security, this is huge.
Right.
Professor Majumdar mentioned Twitter, but the fact that you are talking about online content and how online content has to be regulated, I think cybersecurity is extremely critical, no matter which occupation you are in. Intelligence analysis, we've got somebody who was part of the intelligence setup in the Indian context and who will talk of intelligence and counterintelligence, but this is an elective, if you are interested. And finally, domestic politics and impact on foreign policy, the impact of leadership on foreign policy. So these are some of the electives we've got. And therefore, I think it's a good balance between the core courses, which are diplomatic practice, maritime security and strategy, counterterrorism, the foreign policies of big powers, middle powers, small power, and then you pick an area that will suit you. You can go for global South, you go for nuclear security, you go for intelligence, whatever you want. So that is the kind of paradigm, if you like, we are offering in this course.
So incidentally, Professor Kumar, we do have at least one attendee over here from Vanuatu, who I think she sort of mentioned the fact that, oh, I'm here as well. Yes, absolutely. So it just seems that the world is at this MA in International Relations webinar. All right. I have a couple of questions based on that point you mentioned, that with an International Relations Master's, we can work for corporates. And how does one go about doing that? So I have some basic understanding of this, that corporates, multinational corporations will require experts or people knowledgeable in international relations, and you don't really need an MBA for that. But this person is honestly interested in international relations and wants to work for a corporate. I can tell you with all honesty, we have plenty of our alumni who have studied international relations, are working with companies such as Uber. I don't know if they're working with Coca-Cola, that company keeps coming back, but they are working with a number of multinational corporations. Professor Kumar, your thoughts?
No, if I was a headhunter and I am looking for an investment to be made in a young professional, all I'm saying to you is he will learn about, and going back to Coca-Cola again, not for any other reason, not because Coca-Cola is paying this seminar, because it's just it's just the top of my head, that's all. So right. You will learn about the company's operations by working in the company. But can you learn geopolitical risk analysis? Every company, every institution has to make a geopolitical risk analysis today. If there is a company which wants to invest in 5G today,
Right.
tell me, Professor Majumdar, can you really ignore the fact that countries are making their 5G decisions on the basis of geopolitics and not economics? Let's be honest. Even India
Yeah.
has not made that decision on economics. It has been made on geopolitics. Similarly, semiconductors. You tell me, semiconductors are made in Taiwan, South Korea, and United States. So there is a whole world out there where even commerce, trade, international relations is going to be based on geopolitics, not economics. And that is the big shift that we are seeing. And therefore, I basically think if this course can teach geopolitical understanding to people who finish this course, that is enough for me. That is an excellent investment, because that is enough for a person then to work in the company and then develop a broader understanding so that he can rise in the corporate ladder. I mean, it is well known in corporate governance or in corporate life, the higher you go, the more broad your horizons of knowledge should be. And you should be able to appreciate geopolitical risks. So I would say the one big thing about this course would be, or two, three things, if you allow me. One is critical thinking. Second, geopolitical analysis. And third, an absolute getting the practitioner's perspective on some of these issues so that you can then apply it to whatever organization you're working in.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for that, Professor Kumar. Now, I myself teach corporate governance at the law school at the university, and I can wholeheartedly second you on that. In fact, one of the sessions that I teach is on Enron. And when Enron, the scandal happened, it did have geopolitical and a geopolitical effect as well. Now, I've got a question that, well, around the recognition of the JGU degree, given that it's not a fully fledged university, but deemed to be a university. I think we should spend some time explaining what that means, right? So the OP Jindal Global University was set up by a government legislation in 2009. So it is a fully fledged university. It has been since 2009. Now, sometime in 2018, the government of India came out with a scheme. The scheme was called the Institutions of Eminence, right? So what the government of India said, what they would do is they would recognize 20 publicly funded universities and 20 privately funded universities as institutions of eminence, the highest form of higher education institutions in the country, right? So a few hundred universities applied, only 40 were selected. Now, we were one of them. I remember going through that entire selection process. It was, you know, that process was long and really arduous. Now, what this means is that the OP Jindal Global University is an institution of eminence. What that means for us is that we are free from all regulatory boundaries. What that means is that we are able to offer degrees as we deem fit. We do not require government approval. What this means is we are free to hire faculty members from wherever we choose, as many faculty members as we choose. So it gives us a lot of freedom from regulation, right? As part of the Institutions of Eminence scheme, unfortunately, we also had to add the tagline, Institute of Eminence deemed to be university. Now, this is a regulatory or a legal problem that we really can't solve until the government of India changes their regulation. So to those of you who believe that it's a deemed university, it is not. It is a fully functional, fully recognized university. And in fact, with close to 300 partner universities across the world, we are one of the most internationally recognized universities from India. And I'm hoping that you will take some time to figure out where we are, what we do, what is the kind of pedagogy and the kind of curriculum that we sort of adopt both in our on-campus and our online courses, right? Um, all right. I've got time for a couple of last questions. This is a really important one that's come up. The course is completely online, which means that there are pre-recorded lectures which are in post-production right now. They're being edited, etc. Now, will there be live lectures, Professor Kumar?
There won't be live lectures, but there are going to be live sessions
Okay.
where me or my TA, my
Mhm.
teaching assistant, will interact with people online at least once in 6 or 8 weeks. We
Right.
have a designated topic for discussion, and we will make use of technology to at least meet virtually our participants.
I
So
think
there
I
are no
yeah.
live lectures, but there are live sessions
Right.
which actually surround a particular subject which
Right.
has already been agreed upon and it's part of the course.
Right.
So,
So obviously that comes from, I'm assuming it's somewhat like the Oxford model of having tutorials, right? Great,
correct,
wonderful. So there
correct.
will be some element of interaction between our learners and the tutors and the faculty members. What about the assessment process? Is this going to
So,
be you know, is it going to be group based, solo examinations? Are they going to be proctored?
so that's a very good question, Professor Majumdar, and I must answer it. 30% is going to be what is known as internal, which essentially would be what is known as quiz. You know,
Right.
we have multiple choice quizzes, practice quizzes, and so on, and they will be sort of graded quizzes versus practice quizzes. Practice quiz is only to make sure that you learn the concept. That is not graded, but you have a separate graded quiz, which will amount to 30%. Towards the end, the project itself will be worth 70%. And we are going to make it a group project so that 4 or 5 people get together and do one solid project. And each one of them will then video present it from their perspective to me so that I can individually then grade them. So that's how and this is, by the way, I must clarify to your viewers that many of these things, I have to be honest, it's Coursera, because they are the masters of this game, frankly. They have run thousands of online courses. For example, I told you about the 8-minute video. I told you about the practice quiz, the graded quiz, the project, the live session. All of this is frankly Coursera. Because, like I said, there is no point in OP Jindal trying to reinvent the wheel. Coursera have got thousands of courses online and they have improved upon each course. So when we told them this is the first ever course on IR, they were hugely excited,
Of
and
course.
so were we. And they said, listen, don't argue too much with us. This works well. And I said, absolutely. If you know it's working for students, why should I? If something is not broken, why fix it? So we've gone to a great extent by the pedagogical approach followed by Coursera. I would request the audience, I'm sure most of them know Coursera, but they should nevertheless Google Coursera and see it.
Yeah.
It's a great platform. And many people think that is going to be the future, by the way.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. I think we're almost out of time here. So just to wrap up, if you're interested in the MA International Relations Security and Strategy program offered by the Jindal Global University on Coursera, you need to be an undergraduate degree holder or in your final year of study, right? We cannot accept students who have not cleared a bachelor's degree first. You need to be a bachelor degree holder or be able to demonstrate that you will be able to get into, you will be able to complete your existing degree program by September. I still have a number of questions on the curriculum, on the fee structure, on scholarships. Please do scroll up, take a look at the links I've shared on the chat. They will take you to the information page for this particular program on Coursera. You'll have all the information you need in terms of how long the course is, what kind of scholarships and financial aid is available, what kind of subjects are being taught, what are the fees, and so on and so forth, right? Um, and is there anything else you'd like to mention, Professor Kumar, before we sign out?
No, No, I just wanted to tell your audience that we try to make the class as interesting as possible. So just to give you a small example, if you have 2 minutes, Professor Majumdar.
Sure, sure.
It is one of those rare things that happened in Indian diplomacy, that we recognized a state called Sahrawi Arab Democratic Republic. Most people don't even know. This is a Western Sahara issue between Algeria and Morocco.
Okay.
Now, in response, Morocco broke off diplomatic relations with India, and I ended up flying the Austrian flag in the Indian embassy. I
Oh
was
dear.
the only diplomat to do it. We
Right.
flew the Austrian flag because our diplomatic passport was de-recognized by Morocco.
Oh dear.
So angry at our decision, very justifiably. And so for some time, we were known as the Indian interest section in the embassy of Austria. My car number plates were Austrian.
Right.
And this was so what I try again, if you want to know the difference between the diplomatic privilege immunity of a diplomat and a consular official, we use the case of Devyani Kobragade, who was a consular official, who was a diplomat from India. She was not treated well in the US and so on. So what I'm trying to tell you is that we try to bring so many case study approaches, if you like, so that it sticks in your mind.
Right.
So I'm hoping that you will like these courses, because they're not the usual run-of-the-mill IR course that you will get in a typical university in India.
Right.
I thought the audience should know.
I completely agree with that, Professor Kumar. I mean, who better to teach international relations than somebody who's practiced it for so many years, right? With that, thank you so very much, Professor Kumar. Thank you to our audience. You've been incredibly patient and you've been with us. I can still see I can still see quite a number of the audience still here. You've asked some very, very insightful and incisive questions. For that, I thank you. I know that there are many of you whose questions have gone unanswered. We hope that we have been able to answer some of them. If you still have a question that you need answered on the MAIRSS, feel free to drop in an email to online@jgu.edu.in, right? That's online@jgu.edu.in. Feel free to drop us an email. We'll respond within the next 24 to 48 hours. With that, thank you very much, everyone. And for those of you who might be interested in public policy, I will be back again tomorrow at 6 p.m. Indian Standard Time, talking to Professor Rajiv Malhotra from our Public Policy School, which is offering an MA in Public Policy. With that, thank you very much. Thank you very much, Professor Kumar. It was an absolute delight and pleasure. And we'll, of course, be in touch over the next few days.